Today, American strikes have hit civilian infrastructure in Iran as renewed hostilities stretch into a 12th straight day. Why some say those attacks could be a war crime. Then, what new polling reveals about the advantage Democrats have heading into the midterms. Plus, we are following the money Donald Trump Jr. is making through his investment firm. Are companies just buying access to the White House? Money, power, politics, just getting started on this Thursday morning. Good morning once again. I am Stephanie Ruhle, live from Times Square. It is 9 a.m. on the East Coast, 6 a.m. out west, and we are 103 days away from the midterms. And as we come on the air today, the U.S. is nearing 2 full weeks of attacks on Iran. This was the 12th straight night in a row that the U.S. launched strikes there. It comes as the Houthis, backed by Iran, said they attacked 2 Saudi oil tankers in the Red Sea, another crucial shipping lane for the global economy. That sent oil prices shooting up this morning. And here's what the Secretary of State Marco Rubio said today about the state of the war.
Iran is begging us. Okay, both directly and indirectly. Let's do a deal. Let's talk. Let's talk. Iran is begging every day. The problem with Iran is every time they make a deal, the people that are in charge there, they either break it or they want to change it. So it looks like they're not ready to make a deal. So they're going to continue to pay a price. And every night the price gets higher and higher and higher. And that's what's happening now.
Interestingly enough, critics of the U.S. argue that our administration does the same thing. MS Now is learning just how these strikes have impacted the people of Iran. At least 21 American strikes this month have hit or damaged civilian infrastructure, including bridges, railways, telecommunication sites, and water facilities. That is according to an independent conflict monitor that collected data on incidents documented by news agencies, human rights activists, and state-linked media. The president has made multiple explicit threats to attack Iranian infrastructure, even though deliberately doing so may be considered a war crime. An American official denied that the U.S. is intentionally targeting any of those sites. When asked if the U.S. was responsible for these specific attacks, the White House had no comment, and the Pentagon only denied 1 of the 21 attacks listed. Human rights activists in Iran estimate that at least 1,700 civilians were killed in the first several weeks of the war, including at least 300 children. Meanwhile, here at home, the House passed a massive budget bill that does include up to $73 billion for the war, as well as Trump's voting restrictions. But here's the thing. They passed it knowing that it is likely going to face a major uphill battle when it gets to the Senate. Now, remember, I got a lot of questions, but I know you do, too. Send them to us. What do you want to know about Iran, Congress, the midterms, the economy? Take your pick. Just scan the QR code on your screen. Send us those questions. We're going to try to get to them later in the show. But before we do that, we're going to attack a whole bunch of mine. So let's get smarter with the help of our lead-off panel. Peter Baker is here, Chief White House Correspondent for The New York Times. Daniela Diaz, Congressional Reporter for Notice. And Lieutenant General Mark Hertling, a retired commander of the U.S. Army Europe and an MS Now military analyst. General, 12th straight night, you know you are getting the first question. If the strategy is just to keep hitting Iran until they give in, that seems like a recipe for an endless war, especially with the Houthis opening up a new front. What do you think?
It does, Stephanie, but I'll put a caveat to that. As all things are, this is complicated. Most of those strikes are going into 2 major cities, Bandar Abbas and Isfahan. And having been one of the people who's done wargaming against Iran decades ago, those are the 2 things you want to encircle. And I don't mean to get geeky on you here, but Bandar Abbas, the city next to the Straits, is surrounded by mountains. And it is not only a major port city, but a major military city. So I think the operational plan is to contain that city so there's no movement in and out of Bandar Abbas. You see it there. What you don't see is the Zagros and the Janao mountains that surround that city. If you knock out a couple of bridges and a couple of roads, you have the potential for trapping the military in that city. Now, okay, that's good, but the other bad thing, and this is the complicated part of it, is those are all mostly dual-use facilities. And without seeing the targeting list that the Air Force and the Navy are using, you can't really tell what are dual-use facilities versus military infrastructure. So, you know, I'm truthfully very skeptical that they're avoiding all dual-use facilities. And I'll give you an example. If you hit a water system or a water tank, if it provides water to 10,000 civilians and 100 military personnel. That's not a dual-use facility. So again, you have to dive a whole lot deeper into what the targeting list looks like. But it seems to me that they are putting that city and the other city of Isfahan, which is farther to the north, under an extreme amount of pressure, and it's not helping the civilians of Iran like President Trump said he was going to do months ago.
Peter, we're obviously more oil independent than we ever have been. However, yesterday the president said that the United States has no need for the Strait of Hormuz. Meanwhile, gas is up to $4.09 a gallon. Oil prices have shot up 4% just this morning. Is anybody buying what Trump's saying on this one?
I mean, not if you're at the gas pump. No, you're not paying attention to that. I mean, look. Yeah, exactly. And I think, look, I understand what he's saying. Obviously, Strait of Hormuz, the oil that comes out of there is generally not oil that we use, but it's a fungible market. You know this better than anybody. You can't sit there and say that we have our own oil and therefore it won't have any impact. The impact on the market in one part of the world affects the entire world. And we've seen that at home. And when you're trying to fill your gas tank, when you're a farmer trying to row crops, you're seeing the impact of that. And you're not going to pay much attention to the geopolitical niceties about it. You want to be able to afford to run your business and run your household. And I think that, we're getting closer and closer to the fall, and this is going to be a topic of conversation for, lawmakers running for re-election. And I think that, there's the strategy of putting more pressure, as the general's talking about, is understandable, but I'm not sure whether it's going to lead to a different outcome. The 40 days of pretty heavy bombardment at the beginning of this war obviously didn't force the Iranians to buckle in terms of making the kind of agreement that Trump wants and would accept. So what is going to change their mind at this point? That's not really clear.
All right, well, then let's talk about a different strategy. Congress's. On the $73 billion war funding, the Republicans in the House seemed to say, yes, Donald Trump, sure, have whatever you want. Is that, Daniela, simply because they're passing the buck and they now know that the Senate has to do the hard part and say, I'm not sure about this?
The short answer here, Stephanie, is yes. Look, when Speaker Mike Johnson was really pushing to try to have this budget bill that would provide funding for the Iran war pass Congress, past his conservatives, there was a lot of disagreement from members of his party that were angry, that saying that this is not being offset, that they are against spending costs. And there were some questions yesterday when I was on the Hill as this vote is happening, whether they could, Speaker Mike Johnson could pull it through. But the real question here is what's going to happen in the Senate. It is not clear whether they're even going to take this up, Stephanie, before next week when they're going to be gone. After next week for their August recess, which is when all the lawmakers go back to their home states and spend time in their districts. A lot of House members for spending time for re-election, as Senate members that need to go back because they're facing tough re-elections. But it's going to be a tough sell for them, too, to go back to their home districts, Stephanie, and try to convince their constituents that spending this money is worthwhile when a lot of Americans are seeing gas prices go up, their inflation go up, and they don't understand why we're in this war and what it'll benefit them long term when they're feeling the effects of this right now.
And General, can we just go back to the first point you made? And I want to tie it to this report that 21 American strikes have hit civilian infrastructure. You just laid out the military behind these strikes and where they're specifically trying to hit these two cities. How can an American official deny that this was intentional when the president keeps openly threatening to hit bridges and power plants?
Yeah, they can't, Stephanie, and that's the tough part. And I'll reinforce what Peter said. This is, it is an operational approach. Do I think it's a good one? No, I don't. It's coercive in nature. And what we've seen is Iran being hardened by all this. But what's also challenging now, when you're talking about the constant reporting of potentially hitting civilian targets, again, we don't know for sure, but I'm skeptical that we're not hitting civilian targets. We become much like Russia became during the Ukrainian war. We become pariahs on the world stage. If we continue to hit civilian targets, and if the president continues to post on Truth Social that he's going to do that, it's certainly a war crime unless you get into the fine details of what we're talking about. When the president says, hey, for every strike we have against a ship, we're going to strike a bridge or some kind of facility, that's an indicator of purposely targeting civilian infrastructure, and that is a war crime.
Peter, at the top of the show, we aired the clip of Marco Rubio basically saying as soon as they ink any sort of agreement, as soon as they come to terms with Iran, Iran then tears it up and changes the terms. In the last hour, our president suddenly declared that the new civil nuclear deal with Saudi Arabia, well, now that is subject to the country joining the Abraham Accords. Is he now trying to tack on a new, really big condition after the fact?
It certainly seems like that. That's not a condition that was announced when they first signed this deal yesterday, and it's not something that we've heard from the Saudis on. Nobody from the Saudi government has said that they're in any way willing to recognize, extend diplomatic recognition to Israel. Now, this has been the thought in this kind of a deal for a long time. The Biden administration pursued a normalization deal with the Saudis that would include this kind of a civil nuclear cooperation agreement as an inducement toward that. But of course, that was all blown up on October 7th with the Hamas attack. Today, the president yesterday seemed to be giving the Saudis what they were asking for without requiring the trade-off that the Biden people had sought. A day later, after a lot of criticism, suddenly he's saying, oh, wait, no, actually, we do require the Saudis to recognize Israel. And the Saudis have made clear up until now, anyway, that that wasn't on the table unless there was a pathway to a resolution of the Palestinian issue, of which obviously there's not. So we don't know that the Saudis have made any step toward that. Maybe they'll make some announcement saying something that we don't expect. But absent that, if that's the condition the president's going to put on it, which again is what the condition was always going to be, then this is sort of a meaningless agreement at this point because, that's not where the Saudis seem to be.
General, I want to get your reaction to just one more thing before I let you go. Yesterday, as the president was headed to the dignified transfer, he essentially put words in the mouths of the 4 fallen American soldiers, claiming that they said, quote, "We cannot let Iran have a nuclear weapon," end quote. What do you think about that?
It's abhorrent, Stephanie. I heard the words too, and that's not something soldiers say, first of all. I think I have a pretty good feel for that. Soldiers go where they're told to go, and they fight and do what they're asked to do. They're not going to get into the political ramifications of what the strategic objectives are. You had, a first lieutenant, a sergeant, a specialist, and a private. I would really hesitate to say that they were thinking anything about the nuclear deal and what we have to do for denuclearization of Iran. So the president using soldiers in a political aspect like that, it's not the first time he's done it, that's for sure, but it's also at this particular location, the optics and the location and the place and the event is just, to me, it's just abhorrent that he used that in that way.
When I heard it, I thought about one of those 4 soldiers, Isabella Gonzalez, just 19 years old from Texas. I can't imagine those were her words. General, thank you so much for joining us. Peter and Daniela, not letting you leave just yet. Coming up, Republicans know they got a midterm problem, at least a challenge. But new polling shows that that problem could be worse than they thought. You know who told them that? Fox News. Money, Power, Politics, back in 90 seconds. New this morning, a potential 5-alarm political fire for the Republican Party. A new national poll from Emerson shows Democrats with a stunning 11-point advantage on the generic congressional ballot. We should point out this is an outlier. Most polls shows that Democrats lead between 4 and 7%. But if the lead is closer to this new poll, it would be a wipeout for Republicans in November. Joining me now, MS Now senior White House correspondent Vaughn Hilliard. Peter and Daniela still with us. Okay, Vaughn. Republicans are clearly facing an uphill battle, and when Trump was campaigning yesterday, his biggest message was about communism. Does the GOP think that's going to be the winning strategy in 2026?
You're not hearing Senate and House candidates run around the country talking about communism and the threat of it. You're not hearing them talk about the 2020 election fraud. You're not hearing them talk about the Iran war. The president of the United States has put all these guys in a predicament here, and it's that balance for these candidates up and down the ballot yet again that we have seen in past midterm elections when it comes to Donald Trump. The fact is that during midterm elections, These candidates, they need the MAGA base. They need the president's most ardent supporters, while also trying to pull in folks that are tired of what is happening in Washington. I was talking with one Republican operative working on these midterm races, and this person told me very clearly, this is not the 2002 midterms, when Republicans, right, just weeks after the authorization for use of military force in Iraq and after the war in Afghanistan had already begun, were able to effectively galvanize the electorate around the war efforts and ultimately picked up seats in the House, and they took the Senate. This go around, that's not that reality. This is a clearly unpopular war with American voters, and now Republicans with 3 months left are having to defend it.
Daniela, the war is unpopular, okay? The economic story is great if you own stocks or a home, but not for the majority of the American people. How exactly are Republicans sort of selling themselves these last 3 months of the campaign? Is it just Democrats are worse?
They have their talking points, Stephanie. One of the things being that working families tax cuts that was passed last summer. But really think about it, Stephanie. That was a year ago today. There's not much that they can show for what's happened in the last year in Congress, which, you mentioned earlier in the show, doesn't seem to be doing a lot when it comes to passing any sort of legislation to help Americans when their Republicans are infighting within themselves. So once they go to the campaign trail in August, which is what's expected to happen after today, they're going to have to hear from their constituents in potentially town halls that they're hosting, although we've seen Republicans hosting fewer and fewer town halls as of late. And they're going to have to hear about their rising gas prices. They're going to have to hear about how life has become difficult. And these Republicans are going to have to push, look, sure, the Iran war is popular, but I'm working for you and trying to and advocate for tax cuts, which maybe some Americans aren't feeling. So it's going to be really tough for them in the campaign trail these next 3 months, speaking to what Vaughn was just saying a moment ago.
Vaughn, there's a new poll out from Fox News that shows Americans trust Democrats more on both the economy and immigration. I mean, this is a huge reversal. These are Donald Trump's signature issues. How exactly did we get here?
We got here because Donald Trump has had 6 years now effectively in office. And when it comes to the economy, look, Steph, you have covered the impact of tariffs on not just American consumers, but American producers over the course of his multiple trade wars. And what Donald Trump has consistently promised in his first administration, and then last year when he pushed forward those rounds of tariffs on Canada and Mexico in February, and then tariffs on essentially every other country in April, was that it was going to increase the production in the United States and expand the economic base in the United States. But the exact opposite has happened here. And the patience of folks who wanted Trump to better the American economy, it has waned because they have seen prices go up. And when you look at immigration, again, the mass deportation program that the president campaigned on and effectively won on, well, it's a little different when suddenly you're watching it play out in your own neighborhoods. And that is what folks are watching intimately happen, is people in their own community being detained, people in their own community being shot. And that has repercussions on a humanitarian level that are much harder to reject when it becomes very real in these communities. And it's local officials running for Congress or running for Senate that are the ones that have to defend the actions of DHS and ICE.
Peter, what do you think about this? I mean, going into the last presidential election, one would argue the economy and immigration were two of the biggest vulnerabilities for Democrats.
Oh, absolutely. Those are, if anything, those are the reasons why Joe Biden was going to lose and Kamala Harris did lose. People decided that they were sick of what was going on. They blamed the outgoing Democratic administration. They thought that Trump was, had demonstrated his economic savvy in the first term because the economy was pretty good then. And definitely he had made immigration a huge hot button issue and people were tired of what had been happening at the border. So he sold that. And now he's lost, traction on both of those issues, and the economy more than anything, very, very important there. The other thing to look at in this poll I thought was fascinating was the enthusiasm gap, right? In a midterm election, Not going to necessarily get everybody turned out. What matters is the people who feel like it's worth their time and effort. And what you see in this poll is that 68% of Democrats say they are very extremely, I think is the word, extremely enthusiastic about voting. 68%. Now, that number among MAGA Republicans is roughly the same, so they're about even there. But it's the non-MAGA Republicans. They have fallen off like a cliff here. It's only 41%, a 27-point difference of non-MAGA Republicans say that they are extremely enthusiastic about voting this fall. Why is that? They've grown tired and sour. They felt like they held their nose maybe and voted for Trump last time, and they haven't gotten what they thought they were going to get. And if they don't show up, you know, you're right. That's obviously it works to the Democrats' advantage. That doesn't mean it'll stay that way. And you can say the communism argument seems kind of odd, but that'll work with some people. That'll get people worked up because they may not be enthusiastic about their side, but people vote because they're afraid of the other side.
Sure, they tie the communism argument to the rise in DSA. We can see that happening, but likely those voters are already hardcore MAGA that were going to show up for Trump anyway. But Vaughn, when you think about this enthusiasm, do you think any of this enthusiasm is a direct backfire to President Trump and his Save America Act, his voting restriction interest or passion, and of course the gerrymandering?
Yes, Stephanie, to answer the question here. And look, I think on the enthusiasm gap, the issue also on the Republican side is the fact that they have heard this song and dance of what Donald Trump has demanded and threatened repeatedly time and again. And yesterday he bemoaned the fact that, right, the Senate is where things go to die, is what he said at his rally in Georgia yesterday afternoon. And essentially he's trying to lay the blame at lawmakers up on Capitol Hill for not having gotten more done here. And on the other side, you have Democrats saying a president of the United States that is directly threatening to overstep, Congress and continue to expand his executive authority and his executive power. And the one answer to effectively be able to stop those actions are the courts, but also Democrats up on Capitol Hill. And the promise that you're hearing about oversight, if they were to get control of particularly the House, they would be able to hold in terms of hearings and subpoenas, not just Donald Trump, but more so the cabinet officials, the agency officials that are carrying out these actions, that is one way in which they would be actually able to hold this administration accountable, as opposed to going into the streets or taking the microphone on television and complaining about this administration, but they would actually be able to take those actions.
All right, before I let you go, Danielle, new topic. Any update on Mitch McConnell?
No, Stephanie, that's the trillion-dollar question. If you think about what's happening right now in Congress, they just passed a defense National Authorization Act that was over $1 trillion for the Defense Department. And this is where Mitch McConnell is needed when it comes to Senate votes. We have not heard from him except for that photo 2 weeks ago. There's been onslaught of cries for his office to be able to put out some sort of a statement about where he is or what he's doing, and he's still in the hospital from our understanding, but still a lot of questions surrounding his absence. And he has an important role in Congress as leading the appropriations for defense, and so far haven't heard much.
Well, we're going to keep asking and, of course, wishing him well. Vaughn, Peter, Daniela, thank you for joining me this morning. Coming up later in the program, between a war and an affordability crisis, it is hard for Trump to outrun these headlines. Now he's taking a page out of a very familiar playbook, tariffs. But first up, right after the break, the president's eldest son, Don Jr., cashing in big time on his father's policies. An inside look at Don Jr.'s investment firm and its shocking 200% return. Of course, we're asking the question, is this White House for sale? And the reporter following the money joins us. You're watching Money, Power, Politics. Trump says people don't care. They do. You're here. You're watching. It matters. Let's get down to business. We are about to hit the opening bell, but just moments ago, the price for Brent crude oil crossed $100 a barrel for the first time since May 26. And we're obviously going to keep an eye on that. But first, I want to turn your attention to something else. Since his father's return to office, Donald Trump Jr., the president's eldest son's investment firm, has gone from managing just a few $100 million to more than $3 billion. That is according to the New York Times, which breaks down how Don Jr. and his business partner are cashing in on policies of the current administration openly without any apology. Joining me now, the reporter of this must-read piece, Maureen Farrell, also with us, veteran Washington correspondent, my dear friend John Harwood. He's a distinguished fellow at Duke University and a columnist for Zateo on Substack. Maureen, we ask the question day in, day out, is this White House for sale? Don Jr. is doing this right out in the wide open. Walk us through what his firm has been up to.
Sure. So right after his father won the election, he joined this firm called 1789 Capital. It's an investment firm. They make investments in the U.S. in private companies. And the firm has been on fire since he joined.
Why has it been on fire? Tell us about these private companies, what their connections were to the government a year ago, and what their connections are to the government today.
So they have a huge portfolio. I mean, just starting from On Fire, they've raised $3 billion.
From whom?
From a wide range of individuals. They went out to a bit of the Republican base. There's a connection with Rockbridge Network. They've gone to the base of people. They've gone kind of around the world to raise money. They say they only do it from allies of the U.S. They wouldn't go to China. But $3 billion for a first-time fund manager, people we've talked to said that's staggering. They've never
it's staggering because it's a first-time fund manager who's never raised a dollar, never managed money in their life, except for the fact that this is the son of the president who can say, yo, we can call my dad up over at the White House and potentially get a government contract for, I don't know, this drone company.
So that's obviously been a huge allegation against, or questions have been raised. Democrats are looking into it. I will say I did not find any evidence of the fact. I mean, in my article, I say that Don says he doesn't discuss business with his father. He said that he has never, they have said they've never gone to the White House or to the Pentagon to ask for help. That said, there are many businesses that have government contracts that have received them. No. So there's different firms that did not before and now have received government contracts. They've had favorable outcomes from the administration, like a firm like Polymarket, the betting firm, and they've
where Don Jr. is an advisor of both Polymarket and Kalshi, and those predictive market companies are now facing less regulation, and in fact, the federal government is trying to now push states to have less regulation. So sure, John, Don Jr. can easily say, and his partner, no, I didn't call my dad or walk into the Oval Office to say, can you do this? But is there not evidence when you look at the companies they invested in and now the direct ties they have to our government and government contracts, or at the very least, a lack of regulation on those industries? I'm looking at you, crypto.
This is astonishingly corrupt, Steph. And that doesn't mean that it's illegal, but this is a family and a president who are not public-spirited people. They're not in public life, in elective office, to try to solve problems. Donald Trump, grifting has been his business for his entire career. He has tried to make money off of his name. The one legitimate thing that he made money on and was successful at was a reality TV show that was built on a lie, that he was a successful businessman. He has used the presidency, especially in this second term, for two purposes. One is to stay out of jail, as Maggie Haberman and Jonathan Swan have detailed in their new book, Regime Change. And second, to make money. And he's done very, very well at making money because there are a lot of people who will invest with the president, who see him as a vehicle for them, and they are a vehicle for him.
Maureen, you write that companies trying to get in with the administration see an investment from Don Jr.'s firm as a stamp of approval. Now, they're not going to say these words, but do you read that? Or do you believe that they think they're basically buying access to the White House? Because the favorable treatment they then get, the performance of their companies would lead us to that.
From my reporting, from people I've talked to, there is a sense that, if you put money in there, you raise money from them, you put the banner 1789 Capital on your firm, you acknowledge they're one of your investors. There's a sense from people in the orbit that they think that, oh, this looks good. This is like a stamp of approval, as I said, from the for the administration, that maybe we'll get favorable terms.
And are they getting favorable terms?
I mean, there are cases where they have. Again,
can you give an example?
There's a company called Vulcan
Materials.
Vulcan Materials, and they got a $620 million loan from the Pentagon to help their business, to work on their business.
This is a rare earths business. Now, do we know if other companies in that same space pitched the administration and looked for a direct investment, or did Vulcan get it and they had nobody else that was up for it?
I mean, they're making a lot of investments, you know, either equity stakes or giving loans to other rare earth material miners. And I mean, in my piece, Donald Trump Jr. did say, he's like, it was kind of obvious. He was like, it didn't take a genius to figure out that they would get a loan from the Pentagon. I had no knowledge. I didn't know the people themselves. We learned about this. His partner, Omid Malik, said we learned about this from a press release. But there was their argument was that there was a finite number of companies that could have gotten one of these loans. That said, it was one of the biggest loans the Pentagon has ever, this Office of Strategic Capital has ever given. And it's put this company on a new path. I mean, it was a few hundred million, it was worth a few $100 million. Now it's worth $2 billion. They're off to the races.
So John, what's the argument against it, right? This may be wildly corrupt, a vile grift. It may lack ethics, but lots of folks look at this and say, well, it's not illegal. If you can't beat them, join them. Look how these companies are doing. Why not back a company that you think is going to get an investment from the government?
Well, it might be a smart business decision for the people behind these companies. If they have a Trump associated with their company, they're going to do well. But this is all happening because of the Trump. Nobody thinks Donald Trump Jr. knows anything about rare earths or about drones. He is looking at ways to piggyback on things that the administration is doing to try to make money. You know, I am old enough to remember a quaint time when people in public life were trying to solve public problems. They went into it out of some sense of public spiritedness, and that is just completely absent. And there's a complete absence of shame by the Trump family. They are open about it. You know, Donald Trump says things like, well, you know, my kids have to make a living too. Yes, they do. But in previous administrations, there was a sense that you don't make your living explicitly out of the public service of your father or your senator, mother or father or whatever. That's what this Trump family is about, and they're unabashed about it.
Do you see anything, Maureen, that would make them take pause, reverse course, or is this full steam ahead for Don Jr.? I spoke to someone very, very close to the president recently who said anybody who thinks Don Jr. is looking to run for office, he is running towards being worth $50 billion, and he might actually get there.
I mean, it's full steam ahead. As I said, the returns thus far are more than 200%. They're giving money back to investors. They're in things like SpaceX, another AI company, Cerebras. They're sort of hitting on all cylinders. Everything seems to be going up, up, up. I mean, we've seen this in the private company world right now, too, right? A lot of private companies, anything that touches AI, defense tech, they're all in. So, no, they're not taking a pause. They're going to be out raising more money, making more investments, and they're very proud of their returns.
Listen, they should be up 200%. It's nothing to sneeze at. The question
Steph,
is,
if I could just add to what Maureen said, what's going to slow them down is public reaction, and you alluded to this in the previous segment. You're starting to see in public opinion polling corruption rising as an issue that the public's concerned about. And the juxtaposition of people's own, especially working class Americans, people's own financial difficulties juxtaposed with an administration that is raking in billions of dollars for the first family, that has become a political problem for Trump and for the Republicans. And we've got an election coming up in November, and that's where the real obstacle might arise for Donald Trump and his family.
And I would give a caveat when John is saying working class Americans, that ties us to Donald Trump's original base that voted for Donald Trump because they wanted to drain the swamp, because they felt like there were two economies, there were two sets of rules, and the rich were getting richer, and the rest of the country was being left out and left behind. That portrait that Donald Trump painted back in 2015, 2016 is now front and center with him in the middle of it. Maureen, nice to meet you. John, always great to see you. Before we go to break really quickly, I just want to note market Dow down 370 points, and we are only 9 minutes into the trading day. When we return, the president goes on another tariff tirade, teasing a new round of import taxes that might be contributing to the market today, as well as oil prices. But all of it is most likely just a distraction from something much bigger. My next guest certainly seems to think so. Our dear friend Jeffrey Sonnenfeld joins us. You're watching Money Power Politics. For months now, Americans have watched tariff threats come and go. My next guest says Trump's third tariff tantrum piles more dizzying distractions on top of ever-spiraling failures. But he says, with saber-rattling and swords of Greenland, Venezuela, and Iran, the question is not just why, but why now. Joining us now, the expert, Jeffrey Sonnenfeld, Senior Associate Dean for Leadership Studies at the Yale School of Management. He wrote the book, Trump's 10 Commandments, Strategic Lessons from the Trump Leadership Toolbox, and he joins us now. Why do you think the president has put tariffs back in focus? I know he loves all the ring kissing and favors being asked of him, but this was not popular with the American people or the Supreme Court.
No, or the business community, where 70–80% of them told us in survey after survey and in person, as you've been at some of these forums, where the CEOs say that this is terrible, and overwhelmingly they say that the American public is paying for it. It's not our foreign adversaries or competitors, trading partners that's paying for it. They say American taxpayers or American companies. What CEOs say, they don't like it, so why now?
Why now?
Yeah, that's the great question, is because everything else is failing on him. He's trying to,
So he's bringing back a former failure from last year's playbook?
He gets booed off the stage at the arena, of course, at the World Cup, and the head of FIFA has to go kind of guide him off the stage. He tries to co-opt the 4th of July celebrations, rebranding everything around himself.
But so why this?
Why this? Because this is one of his old chestnuts. He goes after universities, goes after law firms. He goes after places where he pulls a lever where he can find that there's some disagreement. This one, he sees that there's a national rallying cry. He's wrong, but he thinks that people will unify against that they're eating our lunch, and that this is something where he thinks he doesn't have to go through Congress. Now, the Supreme Court, remember, something called IEEPA, which is the International Economic justification for giving the president an override for emergency powers on economic front, that the Supreme Court just said is illegal. That's what he's going after the penguins.
So I'm a dum-dum. He has the power to impose the tariffs, but the impact of the tariffs hurt him politically and us economically. So why do it?
No, when Joe Biden left office, some were complaining about the economy. It was a very strong economy. It wasn't perfect. There are a few targeted areas, but inflation was 2.5%, not even quite, and dropping. Now we're 3.5%, and it's rising, and the fuel costs and everything else are really bad. But the Supreme Court has told them, no, you can't do this in these cross-the-board vindictive things. Remember, he was hitting, whether it was Antarctica or Vietnam or whoever wasn't buying enough, going after the penguins for not buying enough from us. So that was ruled illegal. So then he came out with a different kind of a bypass, which is something which is Section 122 of the Trade Act of 1974. That expires tomorrow. So he loses that power because that gave him, so he has new ones he's come up with.
But then tell me, you talk to CEOs of real companies that do real things here. How does all of this impact them? Because people look at the stock market and they look at corporate profits and they say things are soaring. They're soaring for top technology and AI companies that are not impacted by mass deportations and they're not impacted by tariffs. People look at JP Morgan earnings, right? When banks kill it in times of volatility, and the one thing that Trump delivers to us is volatility. But when you talk to CEOs of American companies, what is this like for them? What do their earnings look like? What is this experience?
The instability drives them up a wall, as well as the increased prices. It's for every $1 of fuel costs going up, it's $100 million for an airline for what it means for their jet fuel costs. So it's crushing to company after company. That whether it's travel industry, retail, we see that right now consumer sentiment, the Michigan consumer sentiment, is plunging. It's going to be probably a pretty tough Christmas. CEOs are really worried, and most of them are not the oligarchs, as we know, is that those people who have controlling interest in their companies, whether or not Elon Musk or Jeff Zuckerberg or whoever, Jeff Bezos, that's a small small number of CEOs. Most of them are hired hands. They're salaried employees, well paid, some of them overpaid, but they're worried.
But doesn't it amaze you that they say nothing? I think back to the Biden administration. I remember Jeff Bezos coming out saying that Joe Biden didn't understand inflation. We hear from almost no CEOs on any of these issues that are deeply damaging to their companies and our economy.
They're afraid of the vindictiveness, Stephanie. You name the most iconic companies in this country, whether or not it's Walmart, Coca-Cola, J.P. Morgan, the Bank of America. These are all CEOs that you and I know that they've been individually attacked by Trump for speaking up on the most mild things. CEO of Harley Davidson. Can you imagine, or Coca-Cola you can throw in there too, can you imagine, and some of these CEOs are stepping down, they think it's just not worth it. High-performing CEOs of Coca-Cola and Walmart is the CEO of Harley Davidson. Their very brand is American Bald Eagle, and they couldn't get bikes made in the U.S., 100% made in the U.S., into Europe because of reciprocal trade sanctions from the EU. So they had to shut down a factory in Kansas City, open one in Thailand. Trump said, don't buy Harleys. Well, so much of their consumer base, MAGA base, are Harley riders.
For sure.
So the stock plummets. And the CEO, who's a centrist guy, his workers lean anti-MAGA, his drivers lean kind of MAGA. He's just trying to run his company down the center. He gets fired because the stock plummets over this. So the vindictiveness is very real. This is a huge problem for them. And the trade issues are just another lever he pulls as a diversionary move. If it isn't Greenland, if it isn't Venezuela, if it isn't Iran, and there are justifications for some of these things. And by the way, in his attack on Canada, particularly off base, Chrystia Freeland, who was the deputy prime minister and finance minister, has just said the reason the stuff's not selling up here is because of the resentment, is that 73% of Canadians no longer consider U.S. their friend.
Well, Trump's pulling this lever, but when he does, the cherries don't come up and he does not hit jackpot. Jeffrey, great to see you. When we return back to school, it's going to look a little different for kids in one European country as they join the global push to restrict social media. You're watching Money, Power, Politics. France is now the first European country to restrict children's access to social media. This week, the French parliament passed a law banning anyone under the age of 15 from using the apps, and it could go into effect as soon as September when, of course, kids go back to school. The ban leaves it up to social media platforms to filter out underage users, though the penalties are still unclear. Other countries have had trouble enforcing similar bans. Australia imposed a ban in December. But months later, officials reported 7 in 10 parents found their kids were still using the age-restricted platforms, finding easy workarounds like a fake birth date. When we come back, we're going to enter the group chat. Jim Acosta, John Della Volpe, Dan Nathan, and Liz Smith, who I have not seen in ages. I'm stoked she's back, are standing by. Keep it here.